Today, it's on the life of Muthuswamy Dikshitar. Tomorrow, it's on Purandaradasa and the Vijayanagara Empire. It is going to be a delightful journey, so we request all of you to join. And we have just 1 hour of program tomorrow, but we will have lunch afterwards. Thank you. Yes. If we may please request you, because of our projector constraints, to move towards that side, you would all be able to see the screen better. If you can see, that is perfect. Thank you. Sri Ram Venkatakrishnan is going to present today on Muthuswamy Dikshitar live songs and the whole journey to the temples.
Check, check.
He said, "When I cannot see." Oh,
As the cameraman.
camera.
That's a problem.
So at least turn the lights on.
Okay, whatever works.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I'll just.
Isn't this very faint?
This is fine now. This is fine. No
That's
problem.
a novel experience.
This is fine. This is fine.
எல்லாரும் எழுந்துட்டு போயிட்டா கஷ்டம் நம்ம பாட்டுக்கு இருட்டில் பேசிகிட்டே இருந்துட்டோம் ஸோ தட்ஸ் த ஹோல் ப்ராப்ளம் குட் ஆஃப்டர்நூன் ஃப்ரெண்ட்ஸ் டுடேஸ் presentation is on the life of Muthuswamy Dikshitar, the youngest of the Carnatic Trinity, Shama Shastri being the oldest, Tyagaraja being the second, Muthuswamy Dikshitar being the third. Yesterday I said that Tyagaraja was like Mozart, the maximum amount of variety in composition, the volume of composition, the emotions that he brings into his works. If you were to draw the same parallel, Muthuswamy Dikshitar would be like Bach, because he was very much a temple-associated musician, just like Bach was associated with the church. And Dikshitar himself, unusually for his time, traveled extensively. I have done a calculation of the distance that Dikshitar traversed during his lifetime of 59 to 60 years, and it comes to around 3,700 kilometers. In his time, this was remarkable because the average person in that era, their radius was around 10 to 20 kilometers, nothing beyond that. 20 years after Muthuswamy Dikshitar died, the Madras Chamber of Commerce and Industry commissioned a study on roads in Madras Presidency. And there is a paragraph in it which says, nobody ever travels outside the boundary of their villages. This is because of the lack of roads and the rapacity of the village officials. There is a tax on entry, there is a tax on departure, there are dacoits on the way, there are no health facilities. You must remember that Dikshitar was born at a time when law and order had completely broken down in what we today understand as Madras Presidency, or today as Tamil Nadu. Because the Vijayanagar Empire had faded away, the Nawabs of Arcot were practically dependent, they were becoming increasingly dependent on the British. Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan were frequently invading this area. The Tanjavur kingdom was on its last legs. There was hardly anybody who was available to administer the entire territory. And it was only in 1799 that finally Sarafoji, who was the ruler of Tanjavur, became a voluntary pensioner of the East India Company and handed over his kingdom. And Tipu Sultan died the same year. He was killed the same year. Thereafter, the East India Company came to own practically the entire region, not through any honorable means, and I am not saying that they were great administrators. They were as corrupt then as people are corrupt today. Human nature hasn't changed in as many years. The fundamental thing is that there was greater law and order brought about with the coming of the British East India Company. But even that would happen only in the years after Dikshitar's passing. He would still live and function in what was reasonably unsettled territory. And despite all that, Dikshitar traveled. And not only did he travel, he left behind in composition for us a record of what he saw. And today, when you read his lyrics, when you listen to his music, and then when you go and visit those temples, you are able to see what he saw. And from standing on his shoulders, you are able to see what Purandaradasa saw. Standing on Purandara's shoulders, you are able to see what Arunagirinathar saw. Standing on Arunagirinathar, you are able to see what the Alvars and the Nayanmars were able to see. So Dikshitar is a magnificent bridge establishing a continuity of wandering musicians who would go from temple to temple to temple and create music and adore the deity in the form of song, and also leave behind fascinating little details which are still standing for us to rejoice in. This is one of the greatest joys of working on something associated with South Indian history. Because when you go to a temple like Kapalishwarar, and then you realize that in the 7th century, Jnanasambandar had come and he had composed Mattitta Punnayin Kanal, Madamaile, Kattitam Kundan, Kapalicharam Amarndan, Ottitta Panbin, Uruttira Palganatharku, Attittal Kanade, Podiyo Poompavai. There are 10 verses. Each verse describes a festival of the Kapalishwarar temple. Till today, those festivals are still being conducted. It is the same way with Muthuswamy Dikshitar. There are so many little dots that you are able to put together when you are able to read his life. Let's go to the first slide. Dikshitar's father was Ramaswamy Dikshitar. And Ramaswamy Dikshitar himself, the life of Ramaswamy Dikshitar begins with a huge migration. As I told you, they were living in very unsettled times. Ramaswamy Dikshitar was born to parents who were already old. Old in that era would be anywhere between 40 to 50. So Venkateshwara Dikshitar and Bhagirathi Ammal were living in the North Arcot district near Kanchipuram. The family came probably from Virinchipuram, though Dikshitar's grandnephew Subram Dikshitar doesn't mention it very clearly. He says they were in that region. And when Ramaswamy Dikshitar, he was born in 1735. When he was 7 years old, which means we are looking at 1742, there was a great disturbance in that region. When you go back and read East India Company history, you're able to find out what that disturbance was. Subram Dikshitar writes, Gurram Varu, there was a problem among the Muslims of that area. Basically, one of the Nawab's assistants had murdered the Nawab in the fortress of Vellore. And there was a great disturbance and people began to flee that region. And Ramaswamy Dikshitar's parents, when he was only 7, they came all the way from that Kanchipuram region. They moved down south. And they came to a place called Govindapuram in Tanjavur district, which is really one of the heartlands of the Bhajana Sampradaya tradition. Both parents die very quickly. And then Ramaswamy Dikshitar moves in search of learning music. He had learned the Vedas from his father, but he was of a very, very musical bent of mind. And therefore, he goes to Tanjavur, where he apprentices himself under Melattur Veerabhadraya, who was a very famous composer of that time. And then he moves from there to Thiruvidai Marudur. From Mayavaram, he moves to Thiruvidai Marudur, where he learns music from Venkata Vaidyanatha Dikshitar, who is one of the disciples of, or the descendants of, Venkata Makin, who wrote the Chaturdandi Prakashika around 100 years earlier. The Chaturdandi is the 4 pillars on which the Carnatic music of that time stood. Gita, Alapa, Thaya and Prabandha. These are the 4 pillars on which music of that era was based. Today, we have moved onwards considerably, but that was the defining treatise of that time. And Ramaswamy Dikshitar, having learnt that music and having established himself as a musician, finally moves back to Mayavaram. From Mayavaram, he moves into Tiruvarur, which is where you see that the temple Gopuram of Tiruvarur you see over there. Now, Ramaswamy Dikshitar was performing in Tiruvarur, and it is said that he also organized the music that is performed in the Tiruvarur Tyagaraja Swami temple. And till today, it is said that the Nagaswaram artists follow the same set of compositions that Ramaswamy Dikshitar outlined at various times of the day and during the various processions at various places. And later, his son Muthuswamy Dikshitar's compositions would get added to that repertoire, and those are also being performed over there. Ramaswamy Dikshitar would not have any children till he was around 40. He and his wife Subbamal, they would not have children till he was around 40. And then he decides to go on a pilgrimage. They come to Vaitishwaran Kovil, where they perform a Mandala Puja for 40 days. And at the end of which he has a divine vision that he would have a child. They go back to Tiruvarur, and then the wife conceives, and in 1775, Dikshitar is born as the eldest of 4 children. And because he was considered, it is said that Ramaswamy Dikshitar, this is not in Subbarama Dikshitar's account, but in later accounts they say that Ramaswamy Dikshitar had a vision of the goddess Balambal bringing a pearl garland and giving it to him. And because the deity in that temple is Muthukumara Swami, the Subramanya Swami in Vaitishwaran Kovil is called Muthukumara Swami, and therefore they decided to name the child as Muthuswamy. Many years later, when Dikshitar would visit this temple again, when he composes Bhajarere Chitta Balambikam in the Raga Kalyani, if you remember the Madhyama Kala Charanam, Bhava Raga Tala Modinim, Bhakta Bhishta Pradayinim, Sevaka Janapalana Guruguha Rupa Muthukumara Janani. The mother of Muthukumara, of whom Guru Guha is a manifestation. So he brings a kind of a rough, biographical detail into the composition. But we forget how musicians lived. What was the basis? Like all of us, they too had to earn. It was not as though that every day God was coming and flinging bags of gold into their houses. So they also needed patronage. They also needed people to take care of them. Next slide, please. At that time, the Tanjavur district was going through a lot of chaos. In the 1780s, King Tulaja, who was the penultimate ruler of the Tanjavur kingdom, he passed away in 1782. And before he died, you must remember there was this East India Company, and all of you must have heard of what is called the doctrine of lapse. That is, if the ruler dies without a legal heir, the kingdom would belong to the British East India Company. I have never understood the logic of this. Imagine saying that, if I don't have any children and I have a house, my neighbor comes and takes it over the next day. That kind of thing, practically, or somebody in the road comes and takes it over. But this is how it was. So Tulaja goes to Maharashtra because he was a Maharashtrian ruler living in Tanjavur, and from Satara he adopts a 10-year-old boy called Sharfoji and brings him back to Tanjavur. And then in 1782, Tulaja is dying. When he is dying, he appoints his younger brother, Amarasimha, as the regent Maharaja of the Tanjavur kingdom to wait till Sharfoji becomes a major. Now, Amarasimha, having become the Maharaja, doesn't want to give up. And therefore, there is a clash. Sharfoji is spirited away to Madras. There is a German father, Father Frederick Schwartz, who plays an important role finally in establishing that Sharfoji is a legal appointee. And the East India Company finally in 1798, so the Tulaja dies in 1782, it's in 1798, so we are looking at 16 years, during which time Amar Simha is the regent Maharaja of Tiruvarur. Sharfoji is living in Madras. Finally, the East India Company establishes that he is the ruler. Sharfoji is brought back. Amarasimha is banished to Thiruvidai Marudur. This happens in 1798. But between 1782 and 1798, it is Amarasimha. You can see him there in procession going down Tanjavur. And he takes a great liking to Ramaswamy Dikshitar. Amarasimha, during those 16 years that he was in power, he takes a great liking to Ramaswamy Dikshitar, and he is his patron. Ramaswamy Dikshitar composes songs praising Amarasimha. And then, by 1792, probably Ramaswamy Dikshitar realized that things could go either way. Amarasimha may not be around for a very long time. At this time, very conveniently, a multimillionaire Dubash arrives from Madras, Manali Muthukrishna Mudali. Next slide. Manali Muthukrishna Mudali, this was his house. It stood till around 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Now it's been demolished in Georgetown. And every Englishman and every Englishwoman needed a translator because they didn't understand the language of the community. It could be Telugu, it could be Tamil, it could be Kannada, it could be Persian. So you needed a translator. The moment you landed by ship from England, a Dubash will associate himself with you. So Dvibhashi, a person who knew two languages. So he knew English or Portuguese, and he knew Tamil, Telugu, Sanskrit, Persian, little bit of everything. It's called butler English, right? So that kind of thing. Pidgin is what you would normally, but with that they would manage. But when neither of the transacting parties knew the language of the other, this Dubash was multimillionaire. And they became exceedingly rich. Most of the Dubashes were very corrupt people, very evil. And when they grew old, they decided to leave behind a legacy of great dharma. So they would build temples. They would have, because they'd be afraid of hellfire, when you die. Anga poi kumbi paakalam aayidutha enna pandrathu. So to avoid all that, you decide that, you will do some good. So they would have a great retinue of musicians, dancers, they would build temples, and so on. So Manali Muthukrishna Mudali was no different. So he arrives in Thiruvarur. Manali Muthukrishna Mudali, incidentally, was the Dubash of this man called Pigot, George Pigot, who was governor of Madras, who was if you look at all the corrupt rulers of India, starting from very ancient times till now, Pigot's name will still be up top. So you can imagine how much money Manali Muthukrishna Mudali must have made in the bargain. So he hears Ramaswamy Dikshitar and he says, come to Madras with me. So the Dikshitar family, by the time there is Muthuswamy, his younger brother Chinnaswamy, and a twin sister called Balambal, and then Balaswamy, who is the youngest child. All four of them, along with their parents, they migrate to Madras. They live in Thiruvattriyur. And the house of Muthukrishna Mudali is in Georgetown. It's in Govindapanayakan Street. So they would keep traveling up and down, and this is how they were living under the patronage of a very well-to-do Dubash. Now the Dubash had, so this is Fort St. George. At the time, in fact, interestingly, all these aquatints were done of Madras city when, at the same time, the Dikshitar was living in this city. So you have various views. So this is the city that Dikshitar would have really been familiar with at that time. It's not the Madras of today, the Mount Roads and Adyar and Mylapore and all that. Georgetown, Fort St. George, Thiruvattriyur, few places. This is how it would have been. At this time, lots of people would come to seek the grace and favor of Muthukrishna Mudali. And one of them was Chidambaranatha Yogi. Chidambaranatha Yogi was a yati. He was a renunciate. And he was also a specialist in the Sri Vidya Upasana. And Muthuswamy, the son, had by the time already become well qualified in Kavya, Nata, Alankara, Tarka Shastra. He knew everything. He was a gifted child, obviously. And he was very precocious. He had learnt everything. When Chidambaranatha Yogi comes to meet Muthukrishna Mudali, he becomes very closely associated with the Ramaswamy Dikshitar family. He initiates Muthuswamy Dikshitar into Sri Vidya Upasana. And then when the yogi decides to go to Varanasi, that is interestingly again an aquatint made at roughly the time that Dikshitar would have traveled to Varanasi. Chidambaranatha Yogi desires that young Muthuswamy, and by the time Muthuswamy Dikshitar is married twice, he's got two wives. And all three of them decide to go along with Chidambaranatha Yogi to Varanasi. This would have been a journey that would have been done entirely on foot, from Madras all the way to Varanasi. They go to Varanasi, they live there. So this is around 1795. By 1799, the 5-year stay in Varanasi is over. And Dikshitar, now Subbarama Dikshitar says Muthuswamy Dikshitar took leave of his guru and came back. But then we have to embellish these stories. It's not enough for us, if this is not interesting enough, right? So the next thing is that he told him, go and put your hand in the river. Moment he put his hand in the river, a veena which had been submerged in the water for so many years, without any warping or anything like that, emerges. It's got Sri Rama written on the dandi. Dikshitar then takes it, then the guru immediately dies, and then the guru is buried in a place called Hanuman Ghat. Now there is a temple that claims that the Paramacharya said that this is where Dikshitar's guru has been buried. This story has come to light 30 years after Paramacharya has gone away. So Paramacharya cannot defend himself any longer. So many things have got added, cycles, stories and stories. That's India, We always have legends being created. But all we know is that Dikshitar came back. In 1799, Muthuswamy Dikshitar with both the Mrs. Dikshitars, they arrive. And the veena, just go back to the previous slide. He has a veena by this time, a very tiny instrument. This is the photograph taken of the Dikshitar veena when it was brought to the Music Academy in 1975. But I have gone and seen the Veena myself in Coimbatore, where it still exists with the Dikshitar descendants. It's only this big. And the Yali faces upwards. And you can see the Sri Rama written on it and all that. It's a very tiny Veena. So after this is over, Dikshitar, along with his brothers, goes to Tirthani, which is very close to Madras. Next slide. And there he is reciting the Subramanya Shodashakshari mantra. And when during the course of recitation, an elderly man arrives, Lord Chengalvaraya himself arrives, as Subrahma Dikshitar writes, puts a piece of candy into the mouth of Muthuswamy Dikshitar and vanishes. And Dikshitar bursts into composition. Now this is a miracle that is recorded in Subrahma Dikshitar's biography. We have to accept it. The first song itself will show you what a genius this man was going to be. So, when we start learning how to read and write, our handwriting is like that. Then it slowly improves. As we grow old, then it goes like that. And it's bad once again. And when we sing, we begin to sing in a way, then we improve, then we plateau. But this was perfect on day one. So you look at the composition, Sri Nathadi Guru Guho Jayati. So set in Maya Malava Gaula, which is the first raga in which all of us begin our lessons. The Pallavi itself has got it in 3 speeds. Just as you learn, Sri Nathadi Guru Guho Jayati, Chidananda Nathoham iti Santatam, Hridini Bhaja, sung in 3 speeds. And Arohanam and Avarohanam, all described in that one Pallavi itself. Then when you look at alliteration prosody, so today you would say his first work was ordinary, then his second work became better, then he attained a certain stage when he became fully mature. But this was a fully mature work even when it began. So, Sri Nathadi Guru Guho Jayati, Chidananda Nathoham iti Santatam Kridini Bhaja. So, Sri and Cha, as per Sanskrit alliteration and prosody, they match. Then Shri is a Dirgha syllable, Shri Nathadi. So, Nana Prapancha Vichitrataro, Nama Rupa Pancha Bhutakaro. So, that is how it goes. Ajnana Dvanta, so the A comes on the Vich and then Nya comes over here. So, Jnana Dvanta, Ajnana Dvanta, Prachanda Bhaskaro, Jnana Pradayako, Maheshwaro, Deenavanodyukta Divyataro, Divyogadi Sakala Dehadaro, Manasananda Chaturataro, Madguruvaro, Mangalam Karotu. So, even there, everything that he had wanted to set out in his compositions are all there. And then the raga name finally, Maya Malava Gauladi Desha Mahipati Pujita Pada Pradesha Madhavadya Amara Brinda Prakasha, everything is there. So this man was a fully ripened fruit even on the day that he had started composing. And his style of composing with the first mode of address, in Sanskrit as you know, we have got these vibhaktis. There are the 8 ways of addressing a person. So the first composition is in the first mode of address, and it is on Guru. And though we consider it to be on Subramanya Swami, it is essentially on Guru, a mystical Guru who would lead him into a higher and higher stage of evolution. Thereafter, he would complete the Guru Guha Vibhakti Kritis. He would complete the 8 modes of address of the Guru, but whether he composed them together or whether he composed those songs at various stages of his life, we don't know. At this stage, Dikshitar would be invited by a seer called Upanishad Brahmam in Kanchipuram. Upanishad Brahmam would live for a very long time. This is in 1799, 1800. In 1837, Upanishad Brahmam is almost 100 years old, and he would invite Tyagaraja also to come to Kanchipuram. And that is how Tyagaraja would come. He was a common link between the two. Upanishad Brahmam has composed Rama Ashtapadi, and he wanted someone to set them to music. Dikshitar's father, Ramaswamy Dikshitar, was an expert on the Jayadeva Ashtapadi. It is said that every Ekadashi day he would perform it religiously in his house, so Dikshitar would have known the Jayadeva Ashtapadi as well. So Dikshitar goes to set the Rama Ashtapadi to music. What is very interesting is when you look at the Rama Ashtapadi lyrics, they are all in this Vibhakti. Perhaps Dikshitar was influenced by Upanishad Brahmam into creating these Guru Guha Vibhakti Kritis. We have no idea. There are also lots of similarities in lyrics and wordings between the Dikshitar compositions and the Upanishad Brahmam compositions. Having lived in this particular area for some time, Dikshitar then travels all around this particular region, and that is when you find that he creates compositions on Kanchipuram, Sholingar, Tirupati, Srikalahasti, Thiruvannamalai, all these places probably during the 4 years that he was living with Upanishad Brahmam in Kanchipuram. That is when he must have created those works. When you look at his composition, for instance, on Kanchipuram Ekamranatha Swami temple, you get yet another idea about how he created his music. So this was a man who would probably go and find out what the Sthala Puranam is all about, what were the salient features of this particular temple, what were important aspects, what was the mode of address of this deity. So in this temple in Kanchipuram, behind the sanctum you have a mango tree, a fossilized mango tree. And underneath you have a Pallava era panel of Soma Skanda Murti, Sa Uma Skanda. That is Shiva with Uma and Skanda with him. And there Shiva is known as Ma Moola Nathar. What is Ma? Ma is mango tree. Moola is at the base of that mango tree. So he who is at the base of the mango tree. So Chintaya Ma Kanda Moola Kandam. Cheta Shri Soma Skandam. So think, Chintaya Cheta, think, O mind, of Ma, of that mango, Kanda, the root of that mango, that root, that primordial root, which is at the root of the mango tree. Chintaya Ma Kanda Moola Kandam, of that Soma Kanda, who is the primordial root, who is at the base of the mango tree. So even today when you go there, you will find that the priests refer to the Swami there as Ma Moola Nathar. And in this composition, Chintaya Ma Kanda Moola Kandam Cheta Shri Soma Skanda. What a way of creating, bringing the right word right into the first letter, first line of the composition. And then the way the whole composition, literally, it's such a sprightly piece. Though originally when written or when practiced, it may not have been what it is today. The speed of this composition has gone up over the years. When you look at the way they would sing it in the old style is Cheta Shri Soma Skandam Santatam. This is how the speed would be. But today it's all been speeded up. But even when you read the lyric, Santatam Akanda Sachidanandam Samrajya Prada Charanaravindam, the way it goes, it is, and then this Uttunga Kamaniya Vrishaturangam, that particular line, that Uttunga, which basically means an uplifted and a tall bull. Uttunga Kamaniya Vrishaturangam. So in that Uttunga Kamaniya Vrishaturangam, even that line, it indicates that as though there is an uplifted mount on which there is a Shiva. Even that small lyrical and the way he sets the tune to that composition is a work of genius. Similarly, he then comes to Kalahasti, where he composes, this begins what is called the Panchabhuta Kritis of Muthuswamy Dikshitar. So the first one would have been the one that he composed in Kanchipuram. Then he composes one on Vayu, which is Sri Kalahastisha. He then goes to Sholingar, where there are there are two compositions which are they are practically twins to each other. One is Narasimha Agacha in Mohanam, and the other is Pavanatmaja Agacha in Nata. They are both almost identical in structure. And while Narasimha Agacha very clearly says Dhiratara Ghatika Chaleshwara, which is Sholingar, Pavanatmaja Agacha does not mention the Kshetra. But because of the similarity of the composition, we attribute it to be in this particular place. So Dikshitar must have gone to Sholingar as well. And in this particular, just go back to the previous one. In this composition on Narasimha, which is Narasimha Agacha, he says, Suruchira Karigiri Vichara Varada. There is one line. This is the instance of how even a small local legend is enough for him to bring it into a composition. So you have a very holy man in this place called Doddacharyar. Doddacharyar was greatly attached to Kanchipuram Varadaraja Swami. And every year during the time when the Garudotsavam of the Varadaraja Swami temple would happen in Kanchipuram, Doddacharyar would go and attend it. So legend has it that as he grew old, he was unable to go and he stayed back in Sholingar praying. And there is a very beautiful Varadaraja Panchashati written by Doddacharyar, 5 verses, Pratyushe Varadaha Prasanna Vadanaha, which is about Kanchipuram Varadaraja Swami coming out in procession from the temple. So this year, Doddacharyar is unable to go. He is staying back. The Varadaraja Swami is coming out in procession from the temple when the priests hear a divine instruction, lower the umbrellas. So the umbrellas are lowered and Varadaraja Swami gives a divine vision to Doddacharyar, who is staying back in Sholingar. That one incident, Dikshitar brings in Suruchira Karigiri Vichara Varada. Karigiri is Kanchipuram. He who blesses this man who is forever thinking about Kanchipuram in Sholingar. That particular incident, very small story, but that also he brings into the composition. He then, as I said, goes to Kalahasti, where he composes on Kalahastishwara. Then he comes back to Madras. When he returns, next slide please. He also goes to Tirupati at this time, where he composes Seshachalanayakam, Shankachakra Gadapanim. These are all compositions that he creates on this particular temple. And then he comes back to Madras. When he comes back to Madras in early 1802 or so, Mandli Muthukrishna Mudali is dead. His son Venkatakrishna Mudali has become the patron of his father, Ramaswamy Dikshitar. And Ramaswamy Dikshitar creates 108 Ragatala Malika on Venkatakrishna Mudali. 108 ragas and 108 talas. It is supposed to be the largest composition in existence in Carnatic music. And he creates this composition using the mudra Venkatakrishna. So the patronage of the family is assured. And then Ramaswamy Dikshitar decides to go back to Thiruvarur along with his family. En route, they must have crossed a number of places, which is why you find Chidambaram, Mayavaram, and then finally they come to Thiruvarur, where they begin to stay. They go back to their ancestral village and their temple town. So in Chidambaram, for instance, Ananda Natana Prakasham, Chitsabesham, Ashrayami Shivaka Amavallisham, because it's a dancing deity, it has got a set of Solukattu Swarams at the end of the composition. And look at the small, interesting aspects of the local legends that he brings in. There are the Dikshitar families which even today take care of the worship in Chidambaram. It is believed that 3,000 of them came from the Himalayas along with Lord Shiva. And when they came, they found that one man was missing. And the legend is that they kept searching, and finally Nataraja said that I am that one person. So I am one of you. So Bhusura Trisahasra Munishwaram. That particular line comes in this composition. He is one of that 3,000 which came. And then in Upper Stevaram, there is a Tandakam called Pukku Tandakam, where he says that every night, all the Shiva deities from all the temples come and stay in Chidambaram, and in the morning they go back. Chidambaram to them is the holiest of the holies among the Shiva temples. So Dikshitar says, Sri Kedaradi Kshetradharam. This is the basis of all Shiva temples starting from Kedar. So he brings the Raga name also. At the same time, he has incorporated the temple legend also into the composition. And then he stays on in Thiruvarur. In Thiruvarur, they stay in a place called Odampoki Street, where the house survived for a long time. Then it's now collapsed and they built a mandapam in honor of Muthuswamy Dikshitar there. Dikshitar gets very greatly attached to the Thiruvarur temple. The Thiruvarur temple itself is a very, very unique shrine. It has Shiva as Tyagesha, and the main deity is an anthill called Valmikinathar, which is a small Shivalinga. But the most important deity here is the processional icon, which is Shiva as Tyagesha, which is a Somaskanda Murti. But you cannot see anything below the face of the deity. So the god, and then next to him the consort, Kondiyammai, they both are seated and they are completely hidden from face downwards. That is called the Thiruvarur Rahasyam. And when the deity is brought out in procession, it is always to a very unique dancing gait, which is called Ajapa Natanam. They will lift and throw the deity, then it will jump and they'll keep moving in a jumping gait. It weighs a ton and more. But it's the talent of the bearers that they are able to do all these things. So this is Tyagesha Murti. The goddess here is called Kamalamba. Kamalamba is not the consort of Tyagesha. So this is Tyagesha along with his consort Kondi Ammai, and then you have got a Spatika Lingam which is inside that hidden portion which is on this side. Jnana Khadga and Veera Khadga are two swords that are placed on either side of the deity. So Dikshitar composes 11 songs on Tyagesha. Among the most famous among these compositions is Tyagaraja Yoga Vaibhavam in Ananda Bhairavi. And there again, he takes the tradition of the Nayanmars and he creates these yatis, which is Gopucha Yati and Strotova Yati, which is basically Tyagaraja Yoga Vaibhavam, Agaraja Yoga Vaibhavam, Raja Yoga Vaibhavam, Yoga Vaibhavam, Vaibhavam, Bhavam, Vam. This is how the Pallavi is structured. And then in the Charanam, finally at the end of the Charanam, Sham Prakasham, Swarupa Prakasham, Tattva Swarupa Prakasham, Shiva Shaktyadi Sakala Tattva Swarupa Prakasham. Sakala Tattva Swarupa Prakasham, Shiva Shaktyadi Sakala Tattva Swarupa Prakasham, Tyagaraja Yoga Vaibhavam. Every word has a meaning, even though it is a condensing and a cutting off of syllables and an expanding of syllables. Every letter and every word has a meaning in that particular composition. And then you have a grand composition called Tyagaraja Mahadvajaroha. The largest temple chariot in Tamil Nadu is the Tyagesha temple chariot. Taking it out of the temple for a procession, making it turn the four corners. Even now there is a YouTube video on it. Some of you may have seen it. Then bringing it back to the sanctum was a monumental task. And it required an army of people to pull it. And the movement of the chariot itself is a stunningly beautiful, it'll sway from side to side as it moves. And over a period of time, this was completely given up because sometimes the chariot would turn a corner and get stuck there and it would take as much as 6 months to bring it back to the base. So this was given up. And of all people, the man who made it possible once again was M. Karunanidhi, the arch-atheist M. Karunanidhi. Got BHEL to design a mechanical engineered chassis which would ensure smooth turning of the curves around the temple, so that the festival, the temple procession would get over in a few hours, and the chariot would be brought back to base. The Devadasi tradition of this temple is very important. The Kondi, that is the consort who is on the side of Tyagesha, she herself is considered to be the first of the Devadasis of the temple. And every time when the chariot leaves in procession, the Devadasi is supposed to come and touch it, and only then the temple chariot will leave. And when the deity comes back after procession, he is so beautiful that the evil eye has fallen on him, So what happens if he sprains his ankle or, if he breaks a foot or whatever? So they will completely cover him in a black paste to make him, ward off the evil eye. So these are all very unique temple traditions in this Tyagaraja Swami temple. So his composition, Tyagaraja Mahadvajaroha, in Sri Ragam, describes all the temple processions in one shot. Nobody else could have done it, that in 8 lines and 8 lines he could have described a set of temple processions that goes on for 60 days and more. So, he describes the coming on the elephant, on the Kailasa Vahanam, the Rishabha Vahanam, the temple chariot, Aslesha Maharatha Sthitim. When the Ailyam Nakshatram comes, the Lord is in the great chariot. And then Vishishtaharam, Shishta Krishna Gandha Dharanam, that is black paste is anointed on his body when he comes back from that procession. So all this is described in that particular song. And then finally, Ashtasiddhi Daikambika Utsava, I forget that line, but it says, Chandrasekhara Navam Acharya Vibhavam. When the Lord comes out in the float festival, he is considered to be Chandrasekhara. On that day, Tyagesha does not come out in procession. It is Chandrasekhara who comes out in procession. Even that little detail Dikshitar does not leave out, and he brings it into his composition. Kamalamba here is completely unique. Tyagesha's wife is Nilotpalamba, who is called Bhogapatni, and she is inside the temple. Kamalamba is outside the temple, pining away for union with Tyagesha. And she is seated in a very unique fashion, which you will never find in any other temple. It is like this, where the goddess has got her foot like that. One foot thrown over the other. It's called Kukutasana. And so in no other temple will you find the goddess depicted that way, unusual feat. And so when he composes his Kamalamba Navavarna Kritis, in the Dhyana Kriti, Kamalambike, he says, Vinoda Charane, she of the unusual feat, because this iconographic depiction you cannot see anywhere else. And the goddess is seated on what is called Akshara Pitham. All the Sanskrit letters have been embodied in the feet. So Akachata Tapadi Varne, which also comes in the Kamalamba Navavarna Dhyana Kritis. Then you have the 8 chakras. So each chakra has a composition, starting from Kamalamba Samrakshatu Mam. Finally, you come to the Bindu, which is the dot in the middle, which is the composition in Ahiri and which is the biggest. And then you have the Mangala Kriti at the end of it. So this is the Kamalamba Navavarna Kritis of Muthuswamy Dikshitar. Dikshitar had a personal puja which still survives with his descendants, that has got the goddess Balambal, it has got a Vallabha Ganapati, a Tanjore painting of Muthukumara Swami, and it has got a Meru, which is still in worship with the family. But we don't know how Dikshitar looked. So this is only an impressionistic painting. Among the 3, we have, as I said yesterday, a portrait of Tyagaraja as he lived. Similarly, we have a portrait of Shyama Shastri done 7 days before he passed away. But we have no idea how Muthuswamy Dikshitar looked. So this is one such artistic depiction of Dikshitar. Next slide. Dikshitar would also compose the Vara Kritis, the 7 Kritis starting from Surya Murte and ending with Divakara Tanujam. It is generally believed that the Rahu and the Ketu Kritis were added later and that they were not part of Dikshitar's compositions. So in that, he brings about his deep knowledge of astrology. And he talks about every planet in every composition. And you also can see the talas, the Suladi Sapta talas. Tomorrow when we talk about Purandaradasa, we will see it. Surya Murte is in Dhruvatala, which is the first Alankaram. Chandrambaja is in Matyatalam. Then Angarakam is in Rupakam. And Angaraka is supposed to be a planet which is not, though he is Mangalaha, he is not really Mangala. So the Talam, Rupakam itself, it begins with the Dhritam and then goes on to the Lagu. So you do this and then you do this. So that is the old way of putting the Rupak Talam. So that is how Angarakam is set. Budham Ashrayami is in Jampa. Then you have Brihaspati in Triputa, Shukra Bhagavantam in Atatalam, and then Divakara Tanujam in Ekatalam. So he completes the Suladi Saptatalas by creating compositions on all the 7 planets. He tells you which planet to propitiate if you want a child, which one you want to propitiate if you want to be married well, how do you get poetry. And this is when you look at what were all the lyrical influence, what did Dikshitar know? What were the Sanskrit lyrics that he used? What were the shlokas that he practiced on a daily basis? Then you realize that, for instance, he knew the Saundarya Lahari, because there are entire verses of Saundarya Lahari that he has taken and he has incorporated. Sudha Sindor Madhye, Suravitapi Vati Mani Parivrite comes in Gauri Giriraja Kumari. And then Sharad Jyotsna Shubhram is included as a part of Kalavati Kamalasana Yuvati. Then you know that he knew the Lalita Trishati and the Lalita Sahasranama because he brings in a lot of that in various compositions of his. Similarly, he obviously knew his Amarakosha, the book of synonyms. Because the Navagraha Kritis are full of, they are line by line when you read the Amarakosha, you can see, oh, Dikshitar has used this word, here he has used this. So this man knew his Amarakosha, that is from where he was. And then he knew Kalidasa's Shyamala Dandakam. That again is used in his compositions on Meenakshi. So several Sanskrit works that he was familiar with, you gradually begin to understand when you go further. Sorry, next slide, please. Now, around this particular area of Thiruvarur, Dikshitar would have several disciples. And it would appear that he was going to stay with some of these disciples to teach them music. When he visited those places, he was also composing songs on those particular temples. What is most interesting about Dikshitar, if you compare him with Tyagaraja, is that Tyagaraja essentially had Brahmin disciples. Dikshitar essentially had non-Brahmin disciples. They were all Devadasis and Nagaswaram artists and Tavil Vidwans. 1 or 2 Brahmin disciples. Among the 11 listed disciples of Dikshitar, only 2 are recognized Brahmin names. All the others were Devadasis and Mridangam artists Tavil Vidvans, Nagaswaram artists. So probably this was a man to whom caste just did not matter. He had transcended that. Gender also did not matter because he was a Srividya Upasaka. And women have a very exalted position in Srividya. Even the concept of a menstrual cycle and its ritual impurity, associated impurity, does not exist for Srividya. So he was probably a very, very emancipated soul, very much ahead of his times. And he was teaching. Next slide. So he comes to a place called Kizhvelur, which is very close to Tiruvarur, where we have Akshaya Linga. This is Appar has described him as Kedi Ili Appar. Kedili Appar. That is the Lord who can know no decline, decay, waste, old age. He's beyond all that. So Dikshitar uses the term Akshaya Linga. Akshaya means the same thing. Shaya, which is like tuberculosis, basically means wasting away. So Dikshitar uses Akshaya Linga. Akshaya Linga Vibho, Swayambho, Akhilanda Koti Prabho, Pakshambho. And in that, the goddess in this temple is known as Vanamula Nayika. So, and there is a Bhadrakali in this shrine as well. So, Badari Vana Mula Nayika Sahita Bhadrakalisha. So, these are all these little stories that he weaves so well into his composition. Then you come to my favorite place, which is Thirukkannamangai, just outside Tiruvarur. Huh? The Swami here is known as Bhaktavatsala. And it's a Divya Desham. It's one of the exalted in the Nalayara Divya Prabandham. And it's got a nice temple tank in front of it. And that is known as the Chandra Pushkarini. And you know, the moon god had this habit of going and sleeping around and getting curses from people, and then he had to go and expiate himself repeatedly. So this Indra and the moon god kept our mythology alive for a very long time. They were men who had no control. So the moon god comes over here for having slept with Guru, Brihaspati's wife Tara. And then he comes over here, so Shashanka Gurutalpa Dosha Damana, that is for having spoiled the bed of his Guru. He comes over here and he attains salvation. And in this temple, Dikshitar probably realized that, you know, you needed to give direction. So he was a GPS man. So he says, Darsha Pushkarini Tira Paschima Bhagam. On the western side of the Darsha Pushkarini, you have this temple for Bhaktavatsala. So you go there, and then it says Vishala Vedasagara Mantapam. So he talks about a grand pavilion called the Vedasagara. So you go to this temple and then you ask the priest, where is this Vedasagara Mantapa? And he says, you're standing in it. And you look around and there are 4 massive pillars. These pillars are supposed to signify the 4 Vedas. And that Mantapam is called the Vedasagara Mantapam. So Vishala Vedasagara Mantapam. Lakshmi Vivahotsavam. So in this temple, Lakshmi marries Vishnu, and that is celebrated every year. Now it also has a massive Garuda. Viraja Mahavibhava Pradam. So there is this Garuda, he gives an exalted status to this Garuda. So that also is mentioned. And then finally, when you go to the Tayar, who's called Abhishekavalli, you will find that there is a beehive next to the Tayar. So 6 months of the year, the beehive is on the left. 6 months of the year, the beehive shifts to the right. It is believed that the gods came to worship and stayed on in the form of bees. Dikshitar writes, Suramaya Madhumakshika Raditam. Bees in the form of the gods have come and worshipped over here. Even that beehive has not escaped this man's attention. Then we come to this particular place which is called Kurikkare. Kurikkare had a zamindar called Vaidyalinga. He is invited by Dikshitar is invited by him to come during the Kumbhabhishekam of this temple. This god is called Vishwanatha here. The goddess is Vishalakshi. And the Vaidyalinga Mudalayar does a Kanakabhishekam for Dikshitar. He showers him with gold. Dikshitar composes 2 great songs on this temple. One is Kashi Vishweshwara Ehi in the Raga Kamboji. And when you read the charanam of this composition, you can see that he is praising the deity. The patron must have thought that he is praising him. Bhavarogahara Chatura Vaidyalinga Vibho. O Lord who takes care of the worldly ills. And then he says, Kanchana Vrishti Prada. So you have provided a golden shower. So it almost looks as though he's praising the Kavijana Sannuti Patra, one who is worshipped by the poets. All this sounds almost as though he's worshipping the Zamindar. Zamindar must have been very happy. Dikshitar must have been worshipping the Lord. And then you have Sri Vishwanatham Bhajeham, which is in 14 ragas, Chaturdasha Ragamalika. Sri Vishwanatham Bhajeham, Chaturdasha Bhuvana Rupa, Ragamalika Bharana, Dharananta Karanam, Sritajana Samsara Bhityapaham, Adhyatmikadi Tapatraya Manobhityapaham, and that is how it goes. Every raga's name comes in its particular place, and then a set of swaras to indicate what the lakshana of that raga is. At the end of the Pallavi and the Anupallavi, 2 ragas in the Pallavi, 4 ragas in the Anupallavi. At the end of that, all those 6 will repeat in the reverse direction to come back and join the Sri Raga in the beginning. And then having completed that, that is 2 and 4, which makes it 6. And then you have 8 in the Charanam. After the 8, all 14 will go back in the reverse order and join with Sri Ragam back in the beginning. One of the greatest compositions possible. As I said, Dikshitar was teaching the dancing women. So you have 2 Devadasis who are well known as his disciples. Thiruvarur Kamalam, who was part of the Kondi Parampare. And then you have Vallalar Kovil Ammani. These were the 2 women who learned compositions from Dikshitar. It is said that for Kamalam's, this is actually a Tanjavur painting of Kamalam in dance. So Kamalam, when she had her Arangetram, Dikshitar composes Rupa Mujjuchi, which is the Varnam in Todi Raga, which is performed even now very frequently. Now, Dikshitar travels with his disciples. So, Audayar Kovil, Veena Venkatrama Ayya, and then Tirukadayur Bharati. He comes from a place called Tirukadayur, where Shiva is Kala Samhara Murti. For Markandeya, Shiva takes the form of Kala Samhara Murti and kicks Yama to death. And then death having died, there is no death on earth. And populations begin to explode. So Yama has to be resurrected once again. So when you go to this temple even now, this is the Utsavam Murti. Under him there will be a metal panel which they will open up and you will see Yama dead. So they will say, please take a look at Yama Nigraham. That is the kicking of Yama. When you have seen that, they will say, please see Yama Anugraham, and you have to turn back. Behind you, there will be a statue of Yama worshipping Lord Shiva. So he is resurrected. So in his composition on Amrita Ghateshwara, he says, Bhayankara Ghora Rupa Dhara Yama Nigraha Anugraham. That same Shankaram Abhirami Manoharam is the composition. He uses the same term there. Dikshitar travels widely. He goes to Kumbakonam, he goes to Swami Malai, he goes to various other places. Next slide. In the 1820s, Dikshitar is invited by Sharfoji to come to Tanjavur. He has come to teach 4 very talented children music. Tanjavur Ponnaya, Vadivelu, Shivanandam and Chinnaya. They are all from a very great musical tradition. They have to be taught music. Dikshitar has been ordained to teach them. He migrates to Tanjavur. When he comes to Tanjavur, his brothers Chinnaswamy and Baluswamy decide to go elsewhere to seek their fortunes as musicians, and they begin traveling. Dikshitar stays on in Tanjavur. Now, we know that Dikshitar, when he was in Varanasi and his brothers were living in Madras, Manali Muthukrishna Mudali got them to learn a very new instrument, which had not been seen earlier in South India. That was the violin. Because the East India Company officers were using the violin. And Baluswamy, the youngest brother of Muthuswamy Dikshitar, sits down and perfects this way of holding the violin upside down with the bow, the scroll on your foot, and resting the instrument on your chest and playing it like this. So Dikshitar, when he comes to Tanjavur, Sharfoji has begun to experiment with Western classical music. Orchestral music has really begun to take root over here. And Dikshitar sets around 40 songs of the British tunes with Sanskrit lyrics. These are known as the Notuswara Sahityams of Muthuswamy Dikshitar. And so the very common one is, God save our gracious Queen, God save the noble Queen, God save the Queen. Santatam pahimam sangita syamale sarvadhare, janani sarvadhare. So that is how the tune is used, and he sets Sanskrit lyrics to that. This is a portrait of the Tanjavur quartet with a dancer performing in front of Brihadishwara. This is when Dikshitar begins composing in what we will today call as the Melakartas, but in his time he followed a scheme known as the Raganga Raga scheme. So our Kanakangi was his Kanakambari. Our Ratnangi was his Penadyuti. They are not the same. They followed a slightly different system of classification. Dikshitar would compose 72 songs while he was in Tanjavur, teaching these boys. He would travel to various places nearby, like Nidamangalam, where he composes Santana Ramaswaminam, Mannargudi, where he composes Sri Rajagopala. And then he gets the news, in 1832, Sharfoji dies. And after that, his son Shivaji becomes the new king. The Tanjavur quartet has already learnt music from Dikshitar. They have moved on to Travancore and other places. Dikshitar gets to know that his brother Chinnaswamy is dead. And he gets very worried about the surviving brother Baluswamy. He doesn't know where Baluswamy is. All he knows is that the death happened somewhere in Madurai. So Dikshitar then sets out in search of the last surviving brother from Tanjavur. En route, in Tiruchirappalli, he visits our Thiruvanekaval, he visits the Malakotai, and he visits Srirangam. So in Srirangam, you have Ranganayakam, Sri Bhargavi. Sri Bhargavi is more or less the Kanakadhara Stotram. And, similarly, you have Sri Mata Shiva Vamanke in Begada, which begins with Sri Mata, and the Anupallavi begins as Sri Maharagni. The Lalita Sahasranamam, Sri Mata, Sri Maharagni, Srimat Simhasaneshwari. So, Chidagni Kunda Sambhuta, where does that line come? That comes in Shivakameshwari. So he uses various lines from the Lalita Sahasranama. Sri Chakra Rupa Tatanke. Over here, the goddess has got the Sri Chakra on both her ears. So Sri Chakra Rupa Tatanke, Mamava. Jambupate Mampahi in Yamuna Kalyani is composed here. Sri Matru Bhutam Trishiragiri Natham is composed at Tayumanava Swami Kovil. Even today, we come from a strongly Trichy-based family. Any signs of pregnancy, and the first composition that will be taught is Sri Matru Bhutam. The story goes that for a Chetty girl, her mother was unable to come for delivery, and Shiva came as the mother. Thayum Anavar. He was the mother. So Vaishya Jati Stri Veshadharana. That particular line comes in this composition. He who takes on the garb of a Chetty woman in order to, to take care of her. So that line, so Sri Matru Bhutam, then Ranganayakam. Then he goes further down. He comes to Payani, where he composes Dandayudha Panim in Ananda Bhairavi. He goes to Azhar Kovil. Now, en route between Madurai and Trichy, he visits two temples. One is Kulithalai, and the other is Thiruvatpoki, which is, Kulithalai is on the riverbed of the Kaveri. Thiruvatpoki is on a hill by the Kaveri, 1008 steps to climb up. This is called Ratnachala Nayaka Swami Temple. Pahimam Ratnachala Nayaka in Mukhari is composed on this temple. And there, even today, the tradition is that the water from the Kaveri is brought 8 kilometers by foot. You go, you collect the water from the Kaveri, you bring it on your head, you climb up the 1000 steps and then fill a vessel over there, and that the Lord is very finicky about the water that he uses. It has to be brought every day. And it is brought by one particular community, which is called the Arya Raja community. Dikshitar says, Adhyapyarya Vamsajata Turyajati Brita Akhanda Kaveri Nadyodaka Bhishikta Sharira Anadi Kuruguha Kumara Marahara. So even today, in his time, he's saying, Adhyapyadi, even now, that Arya Vamsha family is bringing the water. When you go today, even now you find the same Arya Vamsha family is bringing the water and carrying it up these 1000 steps. They have no cholesterol, no obesity, nothing. They'll be climbing up with that pot of water on their head. They think nothing of it, and here you'll be huffing and puffing and saying all your prayers and chased by an army of monkeys, which will ensure that you go up empty-handed, come down empty-handed. So that is there. Then he goes to Azhar Kovil. He finally comes to Madurai. We're coming to the end of the presentation. In Madurai, Dikshitar composes Meenakshi Memudam Dehi, Mamava Meenakshi. He describes the temple procession because Digvijaya Pratapini, during the Chitra festival, Meenakshi comes out as the Queen Empress of Madurai. So Digvijaya Pratapini. So Digvijayam is a term that is used even today in Madurai. And then he proceeds further south. He goes to Sattur. Next slide. When he comes to Sattur, he hears a group of temple priests discussing about a grand wedding that is going to happen in Ettayapuram. And he pauses to listen. And then they tell him that the Raja of Ettayapuram went to Rameshwaram. And there was a musician who was playing the violin. So Dikshitar's ears immediately prick up. How many people could have been playing the violin at that time? So who is this? Oh, his name is Muthuswamy Dikshitar. So he's getting married. So Dikshitar says, that's my brother. I have to go. So immediately they set out. And when he hears that the Raja of Ettayapuram took care of his brother, he composes in Megharanji the composition, Venkateshwara Yeddappa Bhupatim Ashrayeham. I take refuge in Yeddappa, the king Venkateshwara Yeddappa, Kanchana Vrishtiprada Megharanjita Bahukshetram. When Dikshitar arrives in Ettayapuram, the Ettayapuram Raja performs a golden shower for him also. Kanchana Vrishtiprada Megharanjita Bahukshetram. On the way, when Dikshitar is traveling, he comes across very parched lands and he takes pity on them. He composes the raga Amrita Varshini. He creates the song Ananda Amrita Karshini and it pours with rain. Fertility is restored to the soil. His father created Hamsadvani. The son creates Amrita Varshini. And then he comes and stays in Ettayapuram. The wedding of Baluswamy is celebrated with great elan. That is the Gridrachala Swami Kovil, Kalugumalai. Kankashaila Viharena Varena and Subramanyena Rakshitoham. So that is this particular temple. That is the Ettayapuram palace. Today there's not a soul living there, only bats. And the whole thing is crumbling and falling. That's a tragedy of our country sometimes. And then Dikshitar, having lived here and having ensured that his brother is well settled, he decides to go back to Tiruvarur. One wife of his stays back in Ettayapuram to take care of the brother and his newly-wed bride. The other wife accompanies Dikshitar. They go back to Tiruvarur, where he stays for some time. Then, as Subramanian Dikshitar writes very beautifully, he took farewell of all his friends and the gods, moves back to Ettayapuram. 1835, he passes away in Ettayapuram. There is a memorial for Dikshitar there today. Originally it was like this, now it is like that. All that story about, the elephant and all that I will discount because Subramanian Dikshitar doesn't mention it. There's a lot of legend that was built up later around, some drama had to be there. But I will discount all that. Dikshitar passed away. And he left behind a corpus of around 200 and odd compositions, which miraculously after he died became 400 and odd compositions. But that is the way it is. These things happen. And Dikshitar remains one of the great legends in our world of Carnatic classical music, never to be forgotten. The weight of his compositions and the unique structuring of them. Tyagaraja, somebody mentioned it yesterday, I think you, sir, that Pallavi, Anupallavi, and then in the Charanam, the Anupallavi will repeat itself. Dikshitar studiously remained clear of it. The Charanam would have a unique musical structure all by itself. Then it would, because he was teaching for the Veena, in order to bring variety, he would create a Madhyamakala Sahityam at the end of the composition, which gives a certain, it's like a small egret to a jewel which has been created. And you will find that there are some vocal movements in Dikshitar which are very difficult for a singer to do. Only in a Veena can you perform it. S. Rajam told me that all the Dikshitar compositions have one point where they touch the lower pa. I have not researched it. Rajam definitely must have known what he was talking about. So he was essentially composing for the Veena. He was a man who deliberated on every word and every line of his composition. Tyagaraja was spontaneity. Dikshitar was labored work. But great jewels emerged out of Dikshitar. He was equally great in my opinion. If you ask me about my personal favorite, Dikshitar still remains my personal favorite. Thank you very much for your patience.
I have one main question to ask. You have spoken so much about Dikshitar Kritis. Substantial number of Kritis are only in the book. The Kritis which are popular now are Kritis which are kind of Drupad style Kritis. You never spoke about that aspect of Dikshitar, even though he was there in Benares for 3-4 years. So that 4 years should have been his collection of those.
I
would-
have a slight difference of opinion on that.
Okay.
If you look at the Drupad style in which Dikshitar was composing, or if you look at the so-called Hindustani ragas that Dikshitar was composing in, like Yamuna Kalyani, or you look at Dvijavanti, which is Jai Jaivanti, they were all already in existence in the Tanjavur court. Because even prior to the arrival of Dikshitar, Shahaji has included all these ragas in his works. And there was a strong Hindustani contingent already present in Tanjavur. So it's not necessary for Dikshitar to have gone to Varanasi to pick up these ragas. People put two and two together, and T.L. Venkataramayar unfortunately created this legend when he wrote in his biography of Dikshitar. As is well known, Muthuswamy Dikshitar picked up the Hindustani ragas in Varanasi. There is no prior note to this. So, and when you look at the kings who existed 100 years before Dikshitar in Tanjavur, they were already documenting these Hindustani ragas. So they were already in practice, in vogue here. And he was such a traditionalist, unlike Tyagaraja. See, Tyagaraja created almost 21 new ragas. Dikshitar created none except Amritavarshini. So he was such a traditionalist that he was continuously looking behind to what was already there, and he was bringing that to the front. So he, going by his nature, he would have probably used what was already in vogue, a style of composing that was in vogue in the Tanjavur region. And that is all that he was using. It is accidental that today when we look at those compositions, they seem very similar to what the Drupad style is all about.
They are more popular than the other traditional compositions.
That is true.
Why?
But it is also a question of how much easy it is, right? How many people take the effort at the end of the day? Semangudi at the age of 92 was called, Sanjay Subramaniam went to visit him, and he was reading Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini and learning Renuka Devi. So this effort sometimes is lacking. I would not like to say that, I would not like to generalize it. There are several musicians who put in a lot of effort. What is easy is taken. What is difficult is sometimes left. Adella romba kashtam. Sometimes the guru also is responsible for this. Ipa edhukku andha paatalla idha kathindu pongole. So the point is that, there is this, you drive a certain, right in the beginning, for instance, the Carnatic music suffers from this. Thodiya, yuju adu romba kashtamana ragam. So many people have sung in it. So everybody can attempt it, right? Similarly, Dikshitar kirtana ella ippo vanda. Edha Ayirwal kirtana kathin pongo. So this becomes a major issue. I think it needs to be pushed. And people need to make that effort. And Subramaniam Dikshitar himself says, it is difficult to learn. It's not easy at the end of the day. But it has got to be learnt. That is the whole thing.
Somehow you have not sold me. Actually, when I think about it, the most popular Dikshitar kritis,
Vatapi.
now Vatapi, then when you say Rangapura Vihara and Akhilandeshwari.
All of doubtful veracity, incidentally.
Yes, all of them.
Not Vatapi, but Akhilandeshwari.
Some are absolutely traditional, like Meenakshi Memudam or whatever it is, or Rajagopala, whatever. So when you really count them, the other kind, the Drupad style compositions seem to supersede the other compositions, which are tons.
The other problem
they are
is
more
also
descriptive.
Correct.
Yes.
The other problem is also they are not essentially concert friendly. The composition, like I have heard, Amrita Murali, for instance, took up Sri Vishwanatham Bajeham. It was a huge hit in the Music Academy, and I remember she won the prize that year for the best concert. Then I asked her, she said, adukku minnadiyum adukapra enna paadradungiradhu or periya kelvi aidradhu. Because Sri Vishwanatham Bajeham becomes the main piece. Everybody walks away remembering that particular composition. So you don't know, whereas in a Tyagaraja, there is so much invested in it. And see, that's also a problem of, that's a very long story. Dikshitar comes very late to the concert stage. He is essentially lost up till the 1920s or so, which is when there is a great revival of Dikshitar Kritis. Whereas Tyagaraja from 1847, he has already had a tailwind of around 60 years, so to speak, when he has made it to the concert platform and he is being improved upon significantly for making it more and more and more concert worthy. Dikshitar takes a very long time coming there.
Has it got something to do with the Madhyamakala Kritis which are missing?
Of course. There is no doubt about it. Tyagaraja was after, and Carnatic music is Madhyamakala. That is the heart of Carnatic music is the Madhyamakala compositions. So when Dikshitar and Shama Shastri is even more difficult. So
That's why it is even less
Even
popular.
less. Thank you.
It's a tremendous. See, we are blessed to have such a person of scholarship to train them, to tell them the depth of Dikshitar Kritis. And in fact, he gives an opportunity for many of us to make the trip to see many of these temples
Oh, you
and
should.
check for ourselves.
You should.
And then possibly go with a book of Dikshitar Kritis and then read it and at the same time feel it. So that's
I
what
think
it is.
that is what
and it
needs
will
to
be a
be.
great feeling.
Thank you.
Tremendous.
Thanks a lot. Thank
You certainly bring Dikshitar alive for all of us. And just as Mama mentioned, a lot of us living here have never seen or heard a lot of these temples. And this kind of motivates us to make that trip and learn more about the Dikshitar Kritis and go into all the different chakras and all of that that you mentioned. So thank you again. If there is Q&A, if there are any questions from the audience? Okay. What is
It's a composition of very doubtful veracity. It has prosodical errors in it. And I doubt if Dikshitar, who was such a stickler, could have created a composition with a glaring prosodical error in it. And Dikshitar, in my view, and see, Subramanya Dikshitar, it's again, as I said, a longer story. Subramanya Dikshitar, sitting in Tirunelveli, compiles the compositions of Dikshitar in 1904. He doesn't include any composition on a Tirunelveli deity. Perhaps these were really not Dikshitar's works. Perhaps, I don't know. And it is very likely that Dikshitar was very old by the time he came to live in Etayapuram, and perhaps he had ceased composing by that time. So the entire lot, Lakshmi Varaham, Shweta Ganapatim, and then the one on Padmanabha Swami and Guruvayur, Sri Krishnam Bhaja, Sri Kantimatim, Sri Shalivatishwaram, I don't know. I'm not qualified to comment, but in my view, they are probably not Dikshitar Kritis. They were probably added. As a Tirunelveli man, I feel very sad that Dikshitar didn't compose. But when you look at it objectively, so be it. That's how I would look at it.
I think creative people came out with the genius of expression. They have prepared themselves over years and years, or with the tutelage of their gurus, and it just suddenly came out. I don't think anybody laboring would be able to compose those things.
You may be right. I may be right. We don't know at this stage.
The Kritis, Sri Guru Guha and Kalaharana, they sound very similar. So what came first? And maybe there is a common folklore kind of a thing.
That's right.
That
is how it is.
That's
These
how
are
it is.
all common tunes, like Kshitija Ramanam, or for that matter, if you look at the Shankarabharanam compositions like Akshaya Linga Vibho and Eduta Nilachite, these are all common tunes that would have existed at that time. And composers have used them, which is what accounts for the similarity of tune. You can't say which came first, which came later.
Anybody else? Any other? Do we have any other questions?
I requested him to bring some of the books which he has written. Okay? He brought only 2 Madras.
I had brought 4, but 2 got taken on the way.
That's right. 2 he brought and 1 I am already taking. Only 1 left. And then he brought 4 books on Bengaluru Nagaratnammal. Any of us whose children are learning dancing, it is fundamental that they buy this book. Whatever dancing which you are now doing as Bharatanatyam, how much struggle it has gone through to be spread among the community. and how she stands as in the forefront for such things. So that book is worth in gold. I have a copy for myself, so that's why I'm not buying it. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Sri Ram, it was wonderful. And tomorrow we have on Purandradasa and the Vijayanagara Empire, so please do join us. At this point, we will take a short break for snacks.